The sun had been the hot gold of late afternoon when Alexander had left the Isle of the Beast, but here on the Druid's secret isle the sky was as gloomy and gray as ever, for it always is, and this time the beach was watched. Before Alexander quite had time to gain his bearings, two robed priests surprised, buffeted, then overpowered him and dragged him away. It was even darker under the trees, and the pounding of the drums filled his head and made his teeth ache. Up ahead, he saw a huge balefire burning, and before he could protest further, Alexander was dragged into the center of a ring of tall gray stones that marked the circle of druid magic. Conversation was impossible against the thundering beat of the drums, and shout and struggle as he might, Alexander could not make himself heard or understood. Even the druid's cries came to him only in faint snatches over the hammering cadences. To his horror, and despite his struggles, Alexander was thrust into a wicker cage that was swung out and above the roaring fire. In their delight, the flames rushed up to kiss at him. "No, wait!" he cried uselessly. "There's no need for this! My prince is a scholar and a student of magic. He knew that the druids were attempting one of the most ancient and powerful of all spells, a blood sacrifice for fertility, for rain. Alexander assures me that he did not have time to despair then. He was too busy trying to make himself heard over the drums and trying to find a cooler spot in the wicker cage. That his position was torrid can be proved by the fact that after only a few seconds hung over the fire, the enchanted teapot, which had fallen out of Alexander's pack, began to boil. Beauty's discarded dress, which had tumbled out with the lamp, burst afire as he tried to beat out the licking flames with it. And then, of course, it began to rain. The drums in the ceremony suddenly stopped, and in the silence, the only sound was the hissing of the raindrops hitting the hot coals of the balefire. Rightly surmising that Alexander had more than a little to do with the sudden cloudburst, the druid chief ordered him cut down. It was fortunate that Alexander did not really expect an apology, because he did not receive one. "Greetings, O great magician, come from afar. For what you have done, man of earth, you have our deepest thanks and respect. Since the day our sacred oak was stolen by the rulers of the Isle of the Sacred Mountain, we have not welcomed visitors. Of late, our magic seems to fail as well. But I will not burden you with our troubles. How may we repay you?" "By stopping Alhazred from marrying Cassima tomorrow," Alexander snapped. He was rumpled, tired, hungry, cold, wet, and scorched. An unlikely combination, but one unlikely to improve anyone's temper. "Alas, we may have the wish, but we of the Isle of the Mists have no authority to interfere with the Isle of the Crown. If you would call a halt to this untimely wedding, call upon Cassima's own blood to aid you." "Meaning no disrespect," Alexander said, "but the king and queen of the Isle of the Crown are dead, and Cassima has no other relatives." "Then you must call upon Princess Cassima's parents to aid you, O master of the natural arts, no matter where you must seek them. To reach the Isle of the Dead is a simple matter, if one is a skilled enough magician." From the chief druid's expression, it was plain that he thought the prince to be a magician of such skill, and that any of Alexander's remarks to the contrary would fall upon unhearing ears. And to be completely honest, Alexander had no intention of arguing with the chief druid's assessment of him as a great magician, while such arguing might still lead to a roasted Alexander. My prince is quite knowledgeable of matters magical, but more of his knowledge is from books than from repeated practice. "So be it. Tell me what I have to do," Alexander said, resigned to another doubtful undertaking. Nightmare flies between the worlds, and comes to this one to feed upon the nightshade, which is her herb. Seek the nightshade, tame Nightmare, and you will have your passage to the Isle of the Dead. There, approach Samhain, Lord of the Dead. It is said that if a mortal being challenges him and wins, Samhain will grant a boon. Perhaps he might allow a soul to return to the lands of the living as such a boon. It is also said that no one has ever returned from the underworld. Before Alexander could ask anything more, all the druids turned and left the ring of standing stones. Tame Nightmare, challenge the Lord of the Dead and defeat him. After all the other things I've done, now this, Alexander mused dejectedly. He thought of Al-Rashid's spell book. Was Nightmare a creature of the night? Would the spell work on her? And would he know whether or not it had before it was too late? But easy or not, I have to try. Cosima is depending on me. He had the strand of hair from a pure maiden, as he knew that Cosima was a maiden most pure. The rotten egg would give him the brimstone needed for enchantment. Pausing only to fill the skull taken from the catacombs with some embers of the druid oakwood fire, the last component of the charm spell, Alexander returned to the beach and whisked himself back to the Isle of the Sacred Mountain. Night had begun to overtake the world. If Nightmare were to be about, it would be now. It was death to be found on the island, Alexander knew, but he had no choice but to return. He knew Nightmare visited its peaks, for he had collected one of her wing feathers on the beach he stood upon. That was proof enough. The prince reasoned that the creature must come to feed on the nightshade that grew by the cave at the top of the cliffs. Once more, Alexander climbed up the cliffs of logic, this time without challenge, as the steps accepted his prior mastery of them. The fiery sunset light changed to the silver gloom of twilight as he climbed. Soon he had trouble seeing his feet, it was so dark, but Alexander gave no thought to quitting. At last he reached the top, and there, in the first pale evening gloom, stood a death-black winged horse, Nightmare indeed, and placidly eating nightshade near the small cave. It could be no other creature. Alexander opened Al-Rashid's spellbook to charming a creature of the night. He again read over the ingredients, then added maiden's hair, Cosima's hair, to the skull full of embers. Carefully, he cracked the rotten egg over the coals to add the necessary brimstone. A heavy greenish smoke began to rise up from the skull. Worse than the stinking rose, worse than the swamp on the Isle of the Wonder, worse than any smell Alexander could imagine, an omelet from the kitchen of Hades. A vagrant breeze wafted a tendril of smoke over to Nightmare. Her head came up, her nostrils widened, and slowly, step by step, she approached Prince Alexander, spellbound. Before the spell could dissipate, Alexander leapt to her back and twined both fists into her silky black mane. Nightmare quivered all over for a moment, then launched herself skyward before Alexander could even think of commanding her. He barely had time to look down before the green isles and all the ocean surrounding them were lost in the shadows of the night. Her great wings boomed as they cut the air, carrying Alexander higher and higher, to where the stars burned with a hot, unyielding fire. The cold of space, like that of death, struck to Alexander's very entrails. By the time Nightmare began her descent, the skin of his face and hands were numb and tingling. When Nightmare landed, it took Alexander a moment to realize she had stopped. Shaking, he slid from her back, and Nightmare flew away. Prince Alexander of Daventry was trapped in the land of the dead. There are so many ways to die that there must be more than one way back to the land of the living, Alexander told himself firmly. If nothing else, the logic seemed sound, and it helped dispel some of the place's gloom and despair. He looked around. Alexander found himself in a colorless, dismal place. He could see quite clearly, but the light did not seem to be coming from any particular source. He may even have been on an island, but distant details turned to dark too quickly to be sure. Everything he could see, though, seemed baked and bare, parched and lifeless. How appropriate. Alexander squared his shoulders and took another look around himself, shuddering at his initial inattentiveness. There were all manner of creatures lurching around, from shambling Zuvembis, loathsome eaters of the dead, who would be more than willing to add Alexander to their number or their diet, to nearly transparent wraiths. Alexander's twin, Princess Rosella, had once dealt with zombies in a haunted graveyard in Tamir, so he knew how dangerous these shadowy cousins of the creatures she had met could be. They seemed to be wandering the landscape with no purpose, but they could smell life if life ventured too close to them. Alexander carefully eluded the shambling corpses, one touch from whom would spell his death, and made his way to the pair of dim ghosts he saw looking intently upon him. They were shackled to the ground by golden chains. No matter who they were, their bearings were regal, and their faces, even in death, kind. Perhaps they could tell him something of Casima's parents. "Excuse me," he said. "I've just arrived. Can you tell me—" "Alexander of Daventry! But what are you doing here? You're surely not dead!" the chained man cried. But how do you know who I am?" Alexander stammered. "But how should we not? When Casima thinks of you so often. The dead can't see the thoughts of the living, you know," the chained woman said. "And she is our daughter." "You are as handsome as in her dreams." "Then you are the spirits I seek, King Caliphim and Queen Alaria," Alexander hesitated, not wishing to cause these gentle spirits any more pain than he must. "I come on an errand for Casima," he finally said. "I seek an audience with Samhain, Lord of the Dead." "Alexander, you not know what you do," Queen Alaria admonished. "Alhazred is wicked indeed. He murdered both of us in our beds. I fear so for Casima in his hands, but next to the Lord of the Dead, Alhazred is the merest child." "I shall be as careful as I can," Alexander assured her honestly. So Alhazred was as evil as Alexander had suspected. He swore again that he would do all he could to undo the wicked vizier's works of darkness. "And I will not turn back without what I have come for." After a moment, Queen Alaria produced a ghostly bit of parchment and handed it to him. "If you insist in doing this rash thing, you will need a ticket to pass the guard at the gate. This will allow you through, but it is only the first of the obstacles which bar the living from the Isle of the Dead. You must be careful." Alexander looked at the ticket in his hand. He could see his fingers through it. "Will you come with me to Lord Samhain?" Alexander said. Queen Alaria shook her head sadly. "While our murders go avenged, we are earthbound here, upon the surface of the Isle of the Dead, to suffer without rest. Free us, Prince Alexander. Free us." Now, all Alexander had to do was find the Lord of the Dead and persuade him to release Casima's parents. But that was what he had traveled there for anyway. So little as that, Alexander thought wryly. Still, he accomplished nothing standing there. Bidding farewell to the earthbound ghosts of Casima's parents, he took a tight grip on the ticket and his courage. Keeping a special eye for the eaters of flesh, he began walking the path to the underworld. Now, the ghastly landscape changed to a background of nightmare jungle, filled with flittering shapes, ghostly skulls drifting in and out of view, wraiths trailing mist, and the shrouded outlines of a million folk. Everywhere the Zuvembis sniffed and shuffled, bearing death to life. Nearby, Alexander saw the figure of one young woman, weaving eerily back and forth, tears trickling down her face. "Oh, my baby! Oh, my baby!" she moaned loudly over and over. The sound of the despairing dead sliced his spine from bottom to top like a slow razor. "What's wrong?" Alexander said to the ghost. "Can I help you?" "Oh, my baby!" the ghost wailed as if Alexander did not exist. "My baby! Lost! Lost! Lost!" She flung up her hands and floated away, leaving behind a ghostly cloth, damp with ephemeral tears. Alexander picked the handkerchief up. It felt icy and insubstantial in his hands. Ghostly, in fact. Resolved to follow his grandfather's advice even on the Isle of the Dead, Alexander pocketed it. A gibbous moon hung overhead, and in the distance, an eerie, skull-like structure was first evidence of habitation Alexander had yet seen. Keeping his overactive imagination in check, Alexander headed toward it. As Alexander approached, he saw that what he had first taken for an enormous skull was, in fact, a cave. Torches burned darkly against its walls, and the entrance curved back into shadow like the gullet of some tremendous beast. There were two tall skeletons guarding this passageway, the nearer dressed in onyx armor and carrying a huge ring of keys at its belt, the other standing farther back, wearing black robes and a crown. As other spirits slid past Alexander to disappear into the cave, they first passed beneath the eyeless gaze of the keyholder, and then presented their ticket to the night-robed gatekeeper. That is how Alexander thought of them. To the right of the entrance, he saw a row of bones suspended in the air. To Alexander's eye, they looked very much like musical bones, a seldom-seen instrument which is called by some a xylophone, although from where it comes and the meaning of the name is unclear. Music had served my prince very well nearly everywhere he'd gone in the land of the Green Isles, and it was worth attempting there. He has told me also that the overall gloomy mood of the dead land was in strong need of some pretty melody or sprightly cadence. A springtime dance might elevate his own spirit as well as give a last amusement to the souls entering the underworld forever. It was in that spirit he picked up a loose bone lying nearby and began to play. The result was crude, but it was enough to pass for music in that grim place. The bone in Alexander's hand was as chill as ice. Unlike true bones, these gave out a hollow of echoing music, which the gatekeeper and keyholder apparently found irresistible. Soon the fearsome skeletons were tapping a ghastly dance, joined by others of their kind. Theirs was what we might term a tap dance, with 1,000 bones tapping against another 1,000 in ragged rhythm. As they danced, a key from the keyholder's great ring fell to the ground unnoticed. The cold creeping up Alexander's arm soon forced him to stop playing the bones, but his eyes were not so numb to not notice the golden key. Alexander boldly reached for it, and the armored skeleton paid no attention. It may be asked, and rightfully so, why Alexander snatched up that random key. Other than the obvious reply that he was following his grandfather's admonishment, the reason is most obvious. It was a skeleton key. If you want to get something out of somewhere that is being kept secured under a stout lock, or through some intentionally recalcitrant door, sorry if I mispronounced that, a skeleton key will almost certainly be useful. One never knows when a thing like this might become handy, he thought, but it almost always does. It is perhaps one of the great unwritten laws of the multiverse. The key, he knew, would be especially helpful if he could ever leave the realm of the dead and enter in the castle of the crown. It might help him free Cassima. Dropping the gold key into a pocket, Alexander innocently approached the gatekeeper. Cautiously, he held out his ticket, and the skeletal form took it without comment. Thus, Alexander passed, while still alive, into the land of the dead. Alexander found himself inside an enormous vault. Paths and walkways ran everywhere at random. The chamber was filled with an eldritch green light that reminded Alexander of the Oracle's pool, or bad fish at high summer. The sound of dripping water echoed through the chamber. At least Alexander hoped it was water, although it was crimson and not the usual color for such liquid. To his right, he saw what looked like a jumble of bones and metal, and he carefully inched toward it. Alexander found a full suit of dying black armor, once strong and gleaming, now rusted and encrusted with acids and mineral deposits, except strangely for one of the gauntlets, which gleamed as if new. He picked up the gauntlet. It was made of the purest silver covered in black enamel. Words were engraved upon its back. Alexander held the glove up to the light and read, "To challenge death, lift up no human hand. To fight with death, take up no earthly sword. The hand is here, the sword is yours." So I am not the first to challenge death, Alexander thought. He pondered over the riddle engraved upon the gauntlet, trying to ignore the fact that the man before him had obviously failed in his challenge. After a moment, Alexander decided to keep the black and silver gauntlet of challenge and tucked it under his arm. Giving himself a firm mental shake, Alexander continued on toward his meeting with death. The dripping Alexander had heard now grew louder and faster, and soon he realized he was not hearing the drip of running water any longer, but rather the roar of a vast river. At length, the source of the sound came into sight, a river wider than an eye can reckon, a fiercely rushing torrent of black ice, the river Styx itself. Here was the penultimate barrier to the depths of the underworld, and the last ingredient for his way into Cassima's castle. Alexander knelt at the side of the river and scooped Styx water to his teacup, being careful not to touch those corrosive Arctic waters. It mixed with the swamp ooze already there, and immediately formed a thick paste which clung to the cup's sides, like bread dough to a mixing bowl. What a convenient way to carry water without spilling any, Alexander marveled. Looking up, he saw the ferryman of the dead, about to pole his vessel across the river. "Wait!" a prince shouted, but the shrouded ferryman paid no attention to him. Alexander pulled out one of the coins he had taken from the skeleton in the catacombs and waved it. "Look!" he shouted again. "I have the fare for passage!" Assured of his proper payment, gaunt grim Charon silently ferried Alexander deeper into the realm of the dead. Alexander stepped from death's ferryboat on legs chill and unsteady. He was beginning to get the idea that it wouldn't be healthy for someone who didn't belong here to stay among the dead for very long. His path led past a black lagoon rimmed with torches, and the way beneath his feet was paved with human bone. It took him to yet another gate barring his way. Alexander placed his hand on its surface, and then sprang back as the gate changed into a leering demonic face twice the size of his body. "Well, morsel, what can I do for you?" the gate asked in a falsetto tone, much at odds with its demonic image. "My name is Gate, and I let few beyond my jaws. I am called Alexander of Daventry, and I seek audience with Lord Samhain. Let me in!" Alexander spoke with a boldness he hardly felt. Numbed by the wonders and horrors he had already seen, Alexander thought of Gate as only one more obstacle between him and his goal. Gate giggled and then began to recite in a thin, piping voice. My first is foremost legally. My second circles outwardly. My third leads all in victory. My fourth twice ends a nominee. My whole is this gate's only key. Riddle me this, Alexander of nowhere at all, or stand there till you rot, Gate sneered. Not quite that long, Alexander responded. The riddle Gate set him was certainly old enough to, in fact, to have been printed in an antique riddle book, a book whose missing page had adorned the Black Widow's nest. The answer is thus. L is the foremost symbol in the word legally. O is a symbol which always circles around. V leads the word victory, and the symbol E repeats to finish nominee. Love can be the only answer, both for your riddle and for life itself. Not fair! Not fair, you guessed! Wailed Gate. But just you wait, you'll be sorry! But despite all Gate's complaints, its mouth slowly opened and allowed my prince passage entry. As he entered Samhain's palace, Alexander tightly clutched the gauntlet of challenge in his hand and prayed Gate would not close his jaws until he was inside. Skeleton guards, of course, seized Alexander before he had gone 50 feet and dragged him into the presence of the Lord of the Dead. They held him in a cold, implacable grip from which there was no hope of escape. Atop a high dais, Lord Samhain sat upon an enormous throne constructed entirely of blackened human bones. To Alexander's surprise, Samhain was chained to the throne by iron chains and shackles so old they had rusted into a solid mass of metal. An iron crown circled his pale brow, and his expression was grim and unutterably weary. Yet his face seemed almost young and fair, and the combination evoked the curse of eternal tragedy. The Lord of the Dead was surrounded by the lords and ladies of the realm of the dead, who shrieked their approval of his every word. Who comes before the throne of the Lord of the Dead? Samhain said. His voice was a low rumble that seemed to echo through the entire chamber and ring through Alexander's still living bones. I am Alexander of Daventry, and have come to ask you a boon. Mortal man, death comes to all. Have patience. Or are you so anxious for it that you must seek me out? Very well, I will grant you this boon. That is not what I came for, Alexander said, holding the black metal gauntlet out to the Lord of the Dead. I have come to challenge you for 2 souls which are dear to one who is dear to me. It is my right. I ask for the souls of King Califium and Queen Alaria. An astonished whisper ran around the chamber. He must be mad. Samhain will surely slay him. Fool to come here. Very well, rumbled the Lord of the Dead. Amusement is rare here. I shall accept your challenge. If you win, all 3 of you will go free. If you lose, you are mine, Prince Alexander, and will know forever that you have failed whoever or whatever drove you to the desperate extremity of seeking me. Let us be on with it, then, Alexander said, trying not to tremble in his boots. As you insist. My challenge is this, Alexander. I have ruled this land since long before the beginning of time. I have seen a horror beyond imagining, cruelty, the mere retelling of which would strike you dead, terror and injustice and unkindness that would make the very rocks weep tears of shame. But those stones might weep. I never have. Make me cry, O mortal man, and win all you have come for. Despair filled Alexander at Samhain's words. If the Lord of the Dead had seen so much, even the terror and injustice of Casima's plight would hardly touch him. Samhain sat back on his golden throne, eternally confident that he had won. After several moments, he asked, "You have had time aplenty. Do you surrender, mortal man? I promise you I will be quick." "I do not surrender, Lord Samhain." With a shock, Alexander recognized the voice as his own. An emotion too fierce for hope and too chill for defiance filled him. With stiff, trembling fingers, Alexander worked to free something from his pack. "Your story is indeed sad, but I wonder, after so long, if you remember how sad. Perhaps I can remind you." Alexander took out the mirror of truth and turned it full upon the Lord of the Dead. A hush fell over the throne room as the mirror darkened and began to fill with truth. Images danced faster and faster across its surface. Images of pain and suffering, murder and torture and betrayal. The face is the mirror of the life, and after uncounted ages, Samhain gazed once more upon his own forgotten visage. Alexander quickly averted his eyes, for death's existence had been all that he claimed it to be. At last, with a great cry, Lord Samhain pushed the mirror aside. It fell from Alexander's hands and shattered. Tears stood in the Lord of Death's pale, colorless eyes, and the lines in his face were etched even deeper than before. "Truth is the cruelest blade of all, mortal man. Take whom you will from my realm. You have won your challenge. I ask only those two souls who were sent here before their time, the king and queen of the Isle of the Crown. It shall be done. Until we meet again, Prince Alexander, as we will."